Today, you are going to hear about the second part of Harriet Tubman's life. We're going to read about the Underground Railroad. The word underground is sometimes used to describe something that is hidden or secret. The Underground Railroad was not a real railroad for locomotives and trains, but it was like a real railroad in that it helped people get from one place to another, as if they were passengers traveling from one place to another. Passengers on the Underground Railroad were trying to get out of the South and go to live in the North, where slavery was not allowed, and there they could be free. They usually traveled at night and moved through the woods so they would not be seen, and they wanted to keep their movements secret from the plantation owners and the slave catchers. People traveling on the Underground Railroad also stopped at stations for rest. The conductors on the Underground Railroad was a leader. This person helped others on their journey. Today's Read Aloud, we are going to continue learning about Harriet Tubman and her work on the Underground Railroad. I'm going to reread a statement made from the last passage. This event gave Minty a shred of hope that one day she might be able to fight back and possibly win her freedom. What did Minty experience that gave her hope that she could fight back and win her freedom? Do you think Harriet Tubman will choose to fight back and try to win her freedom? Listen carefully to find out whether or not your prediction is correct about whether Harriet Tubman fights for and wins her freedom. The summer air was hot and heavy. There was no breeze to cut the heat, and the shade with straggly bushes did not block the blazing sun. Gnats, mosquitoes, and flies swarmed all around, buzzing and biting. Despite the heat and bugs, the runaway slaves, filthy from head to toe, their clothes tattered and shredded by thorns and branches, their bare feet blistered and cut, slept hard, huddled together in the tall grass. As they slept, a woman, a conductor, watched and guarded over them. Even now, as they sleep deeply in the bushes, this woman sat upright and alert, her sharp eyes scanning the forest and her ears listening for signs of danger. She knew the dangers all too well. Slave catchers were always searching for runaway slaves, lurking in the middle of the swamps, hunting for runaways miles away from the nearest house, town, or road, hoping to catch groups of runaway slaves. The slave catchers were paid great sums of money if they caught runaway slaves, and this woman knew very well that the slave catchers would never give up. This woman who stood guard over everyone else was Minty, the same Minty who used to sit by the crib, hoping the plantation owner's baby would not cry. But people did not call her Minty any more. People now called her Harriet Tubman. When she grew up, Harriet Tubman did not serve in the big house. Perhaps this was because the plantation owners sensed that she was a bit rebellious. She always did things her way. So, from time to time, when she was a young woman, she was sent out to work in the fields, plowing and digging, cutting hay and tobacco, and chopping wood. In time, she became as strong and tough as any person could be. When the plantation owner died, Harriet Tubman faced a new danger. It was likely that she would be sent off to Georgia, just like her sisters. Georgia was deep in the South, where many plantations grew cotton, and conditions were even worse for enslaved Africans. Work on the cotton plantation was difficult and performed in all types of weather. They plowed the fields with teams of mules, hoed the soil to get rid of weeds, harvested the cotton by hand. The cotton had to be picked clean and even made into heavy bales that could be transported away from the plantation and sold. Harriet knew she had to run away from her life in slavery. In order to reach freedom, Harriet Tubman needed to use the Underground Railroad. This was not a real railroad. It was a system of secret routes and hiding places to help enslaved people escape from slavery in the South to freedom in the North. If only there had been a real railroad to freedom, then escaping would have been easy for Harriet Tubman and the others runaway slaves. They could have hopped aboard any train and ridden away from the punishments, endless works, and sorrows of harsh life. In certain ways, the Underground Railroad was like a real railroad. On a real train, there were passengers, or people who traveled from one place to another. Runaway slaves on the Underground Railroad were also known as passengers, and as soon as they ran away from the plantation, they set off an incredible and difficult journey to freedom. But runaways could not complete this journey without the help from a conductor. On a real railroad, a conductor is in charge of the train. On the Underground Railroad, a conductor guided the runaway slaves, leading them through secret paths and taking them to safe houses. These safe houses were known as stations, and like real train stations, they were places where passengers could rest before moving on to the next part of their journey. Many different people provided these stations to escaping slaves, people from both North and the South, who knew slavery was wrong, and even former enslaved Africans who had won their freedom wanted to help others. Harriet Tubman made it safely to freedom in the North using the Underground Railroad. Enslaved Africans like Harriet were free in northern states like Pennsylvania, where slavery was not allowed, but they weren't entirely safe until they left the United States and entered the north of the United States. This was because the laws allowed slave catchers to enter free states in the North and catch runaway slaves and return them to life in slavery in the South. Harriet Tubman did not stay in Pennsylvania for long. She missed her family and friends and could not bear the thought of them remaining in slavery while she enjoyed a free new life. She decided that she had important contributions to make to help those who were still enslaved. So she became an conductor on the Underground Railroad and returned to the South 19 more times for over several years, risking her own life each time to help other enslaved Africans escape to freedom. Harriet Tubman soon became one of the bravest and most famous conductors on the Underground Railroad. Her name became well known among the supporters of slavery. Plantation owners put rich rewards out for her capture. Within a few years, they wanted her stopped at all costs, but she kept going back again and again, hoping more and more slaves escaped. Harriet was startled by the distant sound of a dog barking, and she knew danger was near. Wake up now," she urged, shaking the men and women. "Get up these babies. We've got to get on a-moving." The men and the women sprang to their feet with fear and panic. "Don't you worry now," she assured them. "I know a station not too far from here. But we'll have to move fast, and we'll have to stay in the creek to keep the dogs off the trails." They hustled out of the swamp and splashed up the creek where the dogs would have a hard time following their scent. An hour later, soaked in sweat and muddy creek water, they arrived in the front yard of a small farmhouse. The runaway slaves hid in the weeds while Harriet Tubman slipped through the yard and onto the front porch. She tapped on the door 3 times, waited a moment, and then tapped 2 more times. This was a secret knock, so the people in the house would know their visitors were from the Underground Railroad, and the conductor was there in need of help. A white woman opened the door. She signaled for the runaways to follow her into the chicken coop. There she lifted a trap door on the floor and revealed a dark hole. "It's not comfortable," she told them, "but no one will find you in here. I have some stew and some biscuits inside, and fresh milk. I'll bring it out to you as soon as the coast is clear." Their hearts raced as they waited in their hideout, expecting to hear the slave catcher's dogs barking any minute. But the dogs never came. Running through the creek had thrown the slave catchers off the trail, and for now the runaways were safe. They wanted to sleep, but when the sun went down they had to move on again. There was no time to waste, for nighttime was the only safe time to travel. Outside, Harriet Tubman looked up at the starry sky. She put her arm around one of the children. "See there," she said, pointing upward. "That group of stars up there, that kind of looks like a ladle you might see to scoop out water from a bucket. Back where I'm from, I used to call it a drinking gourd. Do you see it?" "I think so," said the child. "Now, see the cup of that drinking gourd?" Harriet Tubman asked. "Look at the two stars at the end of the cup, and pretend you can draw a straight line from those two stars, straight out into space. If you follow that straight line out, you will find the North Star. It is always there, right in the same spot. You can always find it if you know how to find the drinking gourd in the sky. Do you know why that star is important?" "Why?" asked the child. "Because the North Star is always to the north. If you follow that North Star every night and keep it in front of us, then it will guide us to the north to freedom." And heading to the north and to freedom is exactly what they did.